You're listening to a download from theoutdoorstation.co.uk. Number 588.
Hello and welcome back to The Outdoors Station and a whole new range of podcasts here for the 2025 season. As many of you know, I'm now in my 20th year of podcasting on this topic, and during that time I've had many conversations associated with the outdoors, talked to interesting guests and recorded many audio diaries. If you're new here, welcome aboard. And there's over 580 podcasts sitting in the back catalogue ready for you to enjoy. If you do like what you hear, please take a few moments to leave a review on your podcast app. It all helps spread the outdoors love. Now, today, I'm thrilled to be joined by the endlessly inspiring Elise Downing, adventurer, writer, cake enthusiast, and now author of the brilliant new book, Walk Britain. You might know Elise from her epic run around the coast of Britain in 2016. 5,000 miles, 301 days, and more cake than most of us can eat in a lifetime. But this time, she's swapping running shoes for walking boots and has turned her attention to something a little closer to home, making the great outdoors more accessible, one walk at a time. In Walk Britain, produced by Vertebrate Publishing, Elise shares 90 stunning walking routes across England, Scotland and Wales. Most importantly, all reachable by public transport. From the wild trails of the Brecon Beacons to the coastal paths of Cornwall and even escapes just beyond London, this book is all about adventure that doesn't cost the earth, literally or environmentally. In our conversation, Elise chats about the inspiration behind the book, the realities of life as a freelance writer, and the challenges she's faced in making every route genuinely car-free. We also talk about some of the unexpected sacrifices she made in the name of research, including the noble commitment to eating cake and snacks at every opportunity, all to help the local economy, of course. Whether you're a seasoned hiker, a newbie weekend warrior, or someone who loves a good story told well, you're going to enjoy this episode. So lace up your boots, hop on the train, metaphorically at least, and let's dive in. Of course, 90 stunning walks dotted around all over the UK takes time to research, but it did make me wonder if Elise actually walked every single one?
Pretty much. So the book took me about 3 years longer to write than it was meant to. I missed my deadline so many times because there were just, so many routes to go and try. So my starting point was routes that I already loved, like places that I knew really well and loved going to. And then we kind of expanded out from there to fill in the gaps. So there was a lot of going around and recceing them. There's a few routes that have been tweaked a little bit for various reasons since I went and recceed them. So then we've had like a tester go and just double check everything worked fine. And then a few of the like multi-day ones, unfortunately, I didn't quite have time to do the full Pennine Way or stuff like that. But all of the shorter ones, so that's why it was a bit of an undertaking in the end to do them.
And did you sort of stick to the ethos of the book and take public transport to there and back?
Yeah, as much as I possibly could. Like I said, a lot of the routes was just places that I kind of had loved in the past. And the book sort of came from the fact that I couldn't drive. So I was doing a lot of car-free adventures anyway. Obviously, over the years, some of those adventures have been places I've been to with other people I went to the first time, got a lift there. And there was a little bit of the testing where, so all of the routes and all of the kind of base locations are really easy to get to by public transport, getting to that one place. They don't necessarily, like I'm sure you know, kind of cross-country links can be a bit tricky sometimes. So there were a couple of times where I had to go and recce sort of two nearby areas geographically, but not easy to get to between them sort of via train. So I did have to cheat a couple of times just to actually meet my deadline in the end. But yeah, as much as possible, tried to stick to the train.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned in the emails we've been corresponding on that I'm hoping to do the Wainwright's Coast to Coast soon. And we live South Birmingham on the sort of west side of the UK, just and it's obviously on the main route. So getting up to the west coast, no problem. And then when I came to book the tickets for the return trip from Robin Hood Bay, what a nightmare to try and get from the east coast back down here. So public transport it's a shame it's not a bit more joined up, isn't it, in this country, that we can access and get around a lot easier. And also the prices tend to be quite shocking as well. It seems to be a bit of a lottery.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they'll definitely, I can't think off the top of my head of which ones, but there are a few places where I'd be like, right, I've got a week. I need to go and, get on with a bit of book research. I'll go and do these 2 areas. And then it'd be like, to get the train between them, you've got to almost get the train. I think it was a bit like this with, say, the Lake District and then the Yorkshire Dales. They're both really well served by public transport when you're in them. But to get between them, I almost had to go back to Birmingham and get a train back up. And I think it did definitely, researching this book, highlighted some of those problems. Like, it's the joined upness. It's actually quite easy if you say coming from London every time, because, those sort of the arms of the spider web sort of shoot out, but the connected bits, you're absolutely right, are not great always.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The centre of the world, London, seems to have it easy by comparison. And they what are they complaining about, they say. Anyway, I've thought of an alternative title for your book. I was thinking more along the lines of something like Walk, Eat, Cake, Sleep, Repeat, and Go and Find Another Walk. Something along those lines, because there's quite a few mentions of bacon sandwiches and cake and tea in your entries.
Yeah, so I think when I was putting together the book, we purposefully didn't want it to be a sort of turn left here, turn right here kind of guidebook. So for all of the routes, there's you can download a GPX link, we've got a commute collection for it, and there's an OS map on the page so you can see where it goes. But we really wanted the description. I wanted the description to more be like why I was excited about the place and why I really thought it was worth going. And for me, the sort of snacks you eat along the way are, without a doubt, almost the highlight of every walk. And I think they're sort of the interesting places as well. Like, you go to these quirky little cafes and pubs, and for me, that's so part of the whole experience. And also, practically, when you're going car free, you might not have as much space in your car or your bag for endless amounts of snacks. So you need to know where you can stock up.
Yes, you're obviously a great lover of cakes. In fact, I think you probably built that reputation back in 2016, and your coastal cake route seemed to be a lot of the memories were associated with the food you were eating as you went round the coast. So since 2016, obviously things have changed for you sort of quite dramatically. You admit yourself, I think, in various interviews that I've heard and read, that you were quite naive when you set off, and it was something completely bizarre, but it sort of gradually formed your character, I think, and you formed your interest to where you are now. Am I right in thinking you went to uni after that, or that was during that period, and then you went sort of to work for somebody in Bristol? Would that be right?
So slightly out of chronology. So I went to university first. I went to university in Plymouth when I was 18, finished uni, moved to London for a graduate job, did that for a year, then went to run around the coast. Then I moved back to London, was there for a few more years, and then I moved to Bristol, and then eventually up to the Lake District. So yeah, I've moved around a little bit over the past 10 years.
So what I was trying to get to is that for people who'd be interested in somebody with your sort of lifestyle, as they see it on social media, of course, you've been freelance, I think, since COVID 2020-ish. How is life treating you? How are the gigs turning up? Are you in demand for speaking and writing, or is it quite a struggle for living a freelance life in the outdoors world?
I think it's definitely, it would depend on the day you asked me what my answer to that would be. I think freelancing, I always heard it was quite feast or famine, and that is absolutely true. You'll have a period of months where it's back to back and you don't have a day off, and you feel like you can't say no to something because you're like, well, it might not turn up again. So you're squeezing in everything you can. And then equally, there are kind of weeks and months when the phone just doesn't ring, or I find often things don't get confirmed. So you've blocked out a bit of time, and then for whatever reason I've learnt never to get too excited until the contract's signed and like the event is done. But yeah, I think I kind of took the leap in 2020. So I'd been working full time again ever since finishing that run around the coast, got made redundant, and it just seemed like a pretty rubbish time to be looking for a new job. And I'd worked for a few startups in the charity sector, but mostly sort of in outdoor and sporting events. Everything was cancelled. I was like, this is a terrible time to be looking for a new full-time job. And I had always liked the idea of working for myself, and I guess just the sort of flexibility and freedom of that. So I thought I'd give it a go. And there's definitely downsides, mostly the absolute lack of any sort of security, although you kind of get into a bit of a rhythm with it and mitigate that in some ways. But I just love the feeling of like not having to count days of annual leave, and just like even if sometimes there are periods where you're working really hard, I feel this sense of freedom, even if it's not always necessarily there, and I absolutely love it. I think I'd find it really difficult to go back to sort of structured full-time employment.
Do you find that you have the inability to commit to things because you're always wanting to keep that date free just in case a job comes in or an inquiry? Do you find, I mean, that's a common thing I felt when I was doing freelance work. Are you in the same boat?
Absolutely. It's kind of the first time I've really heard anyone else voice it like that, but that is honestly, I think for me, the worst thing about it. And I think the things that my friends and my family, my partner probably find quite frustrating, because it might be that on paper you're free and you've got weeks free, but it's like I try really hard not to book in firmly more things beyond just sort of like, you know, the essentials, like going on a holiday, going to a wedding. But other than that, whereas I used to love to sort of make weekend plans every weekend, I was always up for doing stuff, I definitely feel a bit on edge about that now, and it does happen. So you've made a plan and then something comes in and you don't want to be flaky, but it's like, oh, but I can't really afford to not do that. And I think that is definitely the hardest thing. And I think it's the hardest thing to explain to other people who aren't in the same boat, because I think people just think you're being a bit like, a bit non-committal. And it's like, I would love to do that, but yeah, exactly like you say, something might come in. And you are often also sort of waiting, I think, kind of waiting for other people to confirm things. And that I find that a bit stressful sometimes. You don't always know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is the people that you're waiting for the confirmation from are working in salaried jobs as opposed to freelance. So their idea of pressure is completely different to actually sitting by the phone waiting for the phone call. Just an email saying, don't worry, everything's, en route would be great. But sometimes they don't fully understand it.
And I find sometimes it's probably something where for me, it's an event or a piece of work that's quite a substantial piece of budget, like that had formed quite a big part of my income for that month or period. But I guess, like you say, if somebody's sitting in a huge company, sort of they're doing their salaried job, they're looking at huge budgets every day, they're thinking that that's nothing, it's not a big deal what we're sort of confirming there. You're such a small part of the pie, whereas to you're a big part of the pie.
You are the pie. Yes, absolutely.
You are the pie.
The book touches on a whole range of places all around, obviously, England, Scotland and Wales. Do you have any particular favourites? I mean, there are ones obviously you're familiar with, and now you've moved to the lakes, obviously you have a relationship with the lakes. But aside perhaps from the lakes, which is probably very close to your heart, are there any other areas which you would really thoroughly recommend as being a very attractive, very enjoyable walk no matter the weather?
Oh, yeah, I've definitely got some favourites. Although I tried really hard to make sure that every route was really good. What I didn't want to do was put in somewhere that was just good. It was all right, but I was just putting in because you could get a train there. I wanted it to be, these are great routes and you can get there by public transport. So yeah, the Lake District, obviously, well, I live here, it's amazing, close to my heart. The other areas I absolutely love, the Jurassic Coast around the sort of coast of Dorset. It was one of my favourite parts when I ran around the coast of Britain, and it's one of my favourite parts of the book. I just think it's absolutely beautiful there, but it's not quite, I mean, obviously everywhere, how far away it is, depends where you're coming from, but it's sort of, it's not in one of the far-flung reaches of the world. It's on the south coast. If you are based sort of London area, it's only a couple of hours away, but it's beautiful. And there's some sections on there that feel quite wild. And I think the reason I really wanted to include it in the book is because it's actually not the easiest place always to get to by public transport. There's not an amazing public transport network around some of it, but there are little pockets you can get to. So I really wanted to include that. I love Scotland. I really enjoyed the islands. I think islands lend themselves so well to car-free adventures, because if you're a foot passenger on the ferry rather than a car, you save so much money. Foot passenger tickets are generally pretty affordable, whereas taking a car on a ferry can be very expensive. So you save a lot of money going that way. And I found that they often, like the Isle of Arran, the Isle of Man, they both have really good bus networks, presumably because a lot of people do travel by as foot passengers and don't have a vehicle when they get there. So I found they really lended themselves to being explored on foot. But yeah, I genuinely do think everywhere I've put in there is really good.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the bus network in Scotland is a vital part of the community, and it's a lovely way to actually get to know people, because generally the bus driver might be also the local plumber as well, and a few other bits and bobs like that, and always knows what's going on. So yeah, I thoroughly recommend certainly taking a bus certainly in the islands of Scotland. Talking about these remote places then, places that although you passed through on your run in 2016, did you sort of call on anybody for any local knowledge as regards a nice route as a starting point, or did you just randomly look at the map and go, well, I think that looks quite nice?
So yeah, I started kind of a bit of a basis. I started with places I'd already visited and loved kind of personally. I made great use of my sort of social media network. I think one of my starting points was I put a poll out on Instagram saying, I'm writing this Car-Free Adventures book. What's your favourite route? Where to go? And I got an amazing response from that. And I think, like say, there's a big section at the beginning of the book about kind of planning your own car-free adventure, and I think the best car-free adventure is one that's close to home. And I found that those people living locally obviously know those places so much better than I do. So that was a really good resource. And then I found there was nothing to beat really than kind of getting out on the ground places. There are a few places that I thought looked really good from like my desktop research, and I got there and they weren't that exciting, and I sort of had to axe those in the end. So I did try and get kind of boots on the ground in everywhere I was going to include, because it felt like quite a big responsibility actually. Because with my first book, I thought obviously I wanted people to like it, but it was like if somebody doesn't like it, they've wasted $9.99 and they might give it a rubbish Amazon review. That's the worst that's happened. Whereas with this, I hated the thought that somebody might book some annual leave, spend their like hard-earned money going on holiday somewhere, and it wasn't very good. And that really felt like a huge responsibility. So probably being a bit of a control freak about it, I tried as much as possible to get some really good recommendations from people, but I always wanted to see it with my own eyes so that I could stand by it if anybody said, oh, that wasn't very good. I'd be like, well, I thought it was.
Oh, it had your stamp of approval, yeah. Obviously, some of these places were some distance from wherever you were starting from, whether it's Bristol or the Lake District. Did you stay over? Did you camp? Did you stay in the local youth hostel? What was your sort of accommodation plan?
So a real mixture of things. I tried, because in the end, I think I signed the book deal for this book in July of 2021, and it's just come out. So it's basically a 4-year process in the end. And kind of 3 years really of fully kind of researching and writing. I think I handed in my draft at the end of 2023. So I tried as much as I could to sort of tie it in with, just for kind of financial reasons as well, to tie it in with places I was going already. So I'm lucky enough to travel quite a bit for work. So if I had a talk booked somewhere and that was near to one of the areas, I'd try and go there. I think youth hostels are brilliant. I stay in those as much as possible. Such a great, like, affordable way to get outside. And I did actually have, which is completely at odds with the ethos of the book, I did have a little blue van that I was travelling around with. Coincidentally, sort of at the same time, although not necessarily for the same reason. So some of the routes I did while I was sort of travelling around in my van, so not car free at all. But I found that actually, because something I really wanted to get across in the book was that it might still be, obviously we all know that train prices can be prohibitively expensive, especially if you're a family or a group. And one of the stats that sort of came up when I was researching the book was that 50% of car journeys in the UK are 5 miles or less. And they account for a huge amount of like pollution, congestion, traffic problems, sort of the number of cars that end up in these kind of small communities that just aren't built for that much traffic. And I really wanted to get across that it might still be that you drive up the motorway to your holiday. If you're a family of 4, maybe getting the train isn't practical, but there are loads of ways that when you're in that place, you can then just leave the car at your holiday cottage or your campsite and use local public transport to get around from that base. And I found that actually going places in my van really lended itself to that, because once I'd parked up somewhere and got a good spot, and I'm not the most confident driver, I only learnt to drive a few years ago, I didn't want to be driving around to all these spots. I wanted to just leave it in one spot. And actually I found that sort of tied in really well with that element of the book. Like, okay, yeah, maybe drive to your location, but then use those buses and trains and your own feet to get around once you're there.
Podcasting around the world. It's all about getting out and having much more fun.
This is the Outdoor Station.
And were there any times where anything happened to you or surprised you about the area that you were not anticipating at all?
Oh, so I'll do one sort of positive and one less positive. So I really wanted somewhere else in the kind of east sort of Midlands area of the country. I'd got all the routes sort of pinned on a map, and I had a real blank spot there. So I'd got the Peak District in there, and then I just couldn't quite work out where to go to sort of, because I really wanted it to be a good spread all over the country as much as possible. So I found the Lincolnshire Broads. I'd never been there before, but it sounded lovely from what I'd read about. So I was like, oh, maybe that would be a good option for kind of that Midlands area. And I got there, and I think it was the fact that there is not an area particularly well served by buses. So there was a little town that you could sort of stay at, and I kind of plotted out a few routes from using some buses from there. But it was just really, I felt like I couldn't include the best routes in the Lincolnshire Wilds because they weren't accessible by bus, and the ones I had got just weren't that exciting. They weren't great, and I thought, I can't put these on the page next to the Lake District, the Cornish coast, the sort of Highlands of Scotland. So I ended up axing that chapter altogether because it didn't really work, and I ended up going for the Norfolk Broads as another kind of east option to plug that gap a bit, which is beautiful and I was really excited about. But at the end of this, I still had one chapter left to fill, basically. And I went to the Isle of Man. It must have been a couple of months before my final deadline to hand in this book. And I was just blown away by how amazing the Isle of Man was. I went there for the literary festival, and I got a foot passenger ferry over from Heysham near Lancaster. And I was there for about 5 days. I had a talk one day, and I spent the rest of the time getting various buses and little trains around the island. Did this amazing run one day, like an A to B on the coast path, and I got a steam train back to my hotel at the end of the day from it. And I was like, this is what, like, and what I also wanted to include were routes where it felt like the not going by car added to the experience. And on that one, I was like, how cool is it to get a steam train home from your run? Like, that's so much more exciting than just going back to your car. And it's got an amazing bus network around the coast. So I put the Isle of Man in at the end as sort of a bonus chapter, because I was like, this is everything I kind of want the book to be about. And there's a few other places, like in the Western Highlands, there's this this train line that kind of runs across the Highlands. And there's a station called Corra that you can get the train to from Fort William, and you can't access that by road. So there's a few Wainwrights around there and Loch Ossian. And it's like 20 miles from the nearest road. You can only get there on foot, train or bike. And I was like, that's what I wanted to include, stuff where not going by car made it more exciting rather than it just being a bit of an inconvenience and something you're doing because you should.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really lovely romantic location, isn't it? That train station in the middle of nowhere, yeah, on the land there, yeah. And I've visited it a few times and passed through Loch Ossian. And did you find it a bit windy? It was always windy when I'm going through there.
Yeah, it wasn't good weather the day I went. So something I did find is because obviously I often just had a certain window that I was in a place, and I got very fit in this book because I'd have a certain window and I was like, right, I've got to do all of these routes in the next 4 days. And sometimes the weather was on my side and sometimes it absolutely wasn't. And the day I went to Loch Ossian, it really wasn't a very good day. And I think because a lot of the pictures in the book are ones I took out and about, but sometimes we had to obviously source them from sort of stock imagery because the day I went was just not a good day for photos sometimes. But that's what I actually really liked about the walk around the loch, though, there, is it's actually quite a good wet weather option. You're not going up any Munros, you're not going up anything high, you can just sort of go around the lake, and I think they're really good sort of wet weather boots to have in your back pocket rather than sort of, if you're always trying to go up a peak, that can be very weather dependent.
Yeah, but as you obviously know, in Scotland, wait 20 minutes, the weather's going to change. It always does. It always does. I was going to talk to you about the photographs, actually. There's some lovely photographs in here, and I was going to ask you, and you just answered the question. In fact, you took the majority of them, but unfortunately you had to source others due to the weather conditions. Yeah,
they're a real mixture. So I'd say the 2/3 are probably mine, and then others were sourced from some very kind sort of bloggers and content creators. My publisher has got a really good network of people they work with who've done routes. And then I think the front cover is a professional shot because you need a bit better than my iPhone photography if you're blowing something up that big. But yeah, quite a few of my friends are sort of in the background of a lot of them. So they're all going through to see who'd made it into the book.
Yeah, I hope they've all bought copies. That's the main thing. Definitely contained audience. The book, obviously, you've got the details and you've got the map and so on. And I was reading on your blog there, you did write about your addiction to phones, technology, and it's unfortunately crept into all our lives. So one of the questions I was thinking of: have you ever climbed a mountain just using a map and compass and left your phone behind?
Well, I have now. So I'm doing my mountain leader training at the moment. Well, I've done to become a qualified mountain leader, you have to do a training week and then an assessment week. So I've done my training. I did that about a year ago, and I'm hoping to complete my assessment this summer. And part of the and the navigation is a big part of that. And part of the reason I wanted to do it was I was like, I spend so much time kind of talking about going outside, and my navigation was just terrible, my manual navigation. I was like, I always tell people to take a map and a compass out, and I did normally take one, but I didn't feel confident in my abilities to actually get myself out of any trouble using one. So the past kind of year or so, I've spent a lot of time up a mountain trying to get around, with just a map and a compass and not using kind of any sort of mapping app. And at first it felt like I just found it really difficult at first, to be honest, much more challenging than I expected to. But now I've got a little bit better at it. I've actually found that I feel like I do really appreciate what I'm doing so much more. I spend rather than just following that line on my watch or following the dot on my phone, there is something about standing there with the map, even though it takes me ages to get anywhere because it takes me a long time to sort of figure out what I'm doing. I've actually found it's really added to my experience outside, and I've really enjoyed learning to navigate properly, and I just wish I'd done it sooner, to be honest.
Do you find then that having a map in front of you and having a phone, comparing the two side by side, that people seem to say that the phone gives you this feeling of walls? You can only see X amount of ground around you, so you've got this sort of mental feeling the edge of the phone is the edge of the walls. Although you can move the map, the visibility and awareness of what you've got, because obviously your eyes can see visually best part of 180 degrees, whatever it may be. And with a map, you can actually say, well, that's where I am, that's where I'm going. But over there, a mile away or a couple of miles away, those mountains, and you have that information in front of you. Do you feel that gives you a different dynamic when you're on the hill?
Yeah, definitely. So because I've done most of my sort of navigation practice in the Lake District, just because that's where I'm based now. And my boyfriend sort of lost, because he grew up in Cumbria and he has grown up looking at an OS map to go on an adventure. And he used to laugh about how poor my awareness of how places join up is. Like, because I'd done lots of routes, and I'd done in quite a big range of places in the Lake District. I felt like I knew places quite well, but I could never understand that, I'm standing on this fell and that's that one over there, but I drove to a completely different place or start, and I just found it really confusing. And I found that, trying to navigate properly really connects places up for me. You're like, I'm standing on Scarfell, and Wasdale's there, and whatever's there. And I found, it definitely is joined places up for me a lot. And it does make it a bit easier to be a bit more spontaneous than when you're out on the walk, because it's like, that looks fun. And it's actually not that far away. Whereas before I was a bit of a slave to my route, I think.
Right. Yeah. I think that's interesting. I think that's a comment that I've heard Gen Z age range say a few times, that they struggle joining chunks of data together to form a bigger map. Which brings me on to something else, which is something that occurred to me today when I was sort of drafting out some of these questions. You're now obviously an influencer in the Gen Z generation. People recognise you, you've got a lot of following, etc., etc. But who are the role models for Gen Z these days? Who are the people that are getting the message through to the sub 30 age range and sort of teaching them about how to enjoy the outdoors responsibly and a bit of awareness and education about the outdoors? Who are the influencers that influence them?
I think I'm actually a millennial. I'm 33.
Oh, okay. Apologies.
So I'm not sure I can speak for the under 30s. But I don't know, it is tricky, because I think when I started doing, before I went on my run around the coast of Britain, it was kind of a couple of years before that I'd started to discover all these people doing these big sort of human powered adventures. And at the time I was reading the blogs of people like Anna McNuff, who'd ran the length of New Zealand, and Al Humphreys was doing his micro adventures challenges, and Sean Conway was doing loads of stuff, and I was reading those kind of people's blogs and watching their videos. And before that, I just genuinely didn't know that people did these sort of things under their own steam. I didn't, even obviously people have been going on big expeditions and stuff for decades, centuries, but it was discovering sort of these people's blogs and video channels and stuff that I kind of got into this world of adventure. And I think social media gets a really bad rep sometimes, and there are a lot of downside, and I think being a slave to our phones is absolutely one of them. I have no doubt, to be honest, that I will lie on my deathbed and regret the amount of time that I spent absentmindedly scrolling through my phone. That is not going to feel like a good way to have spent my life, and it's so I'm consciously always trying to sort of minimize. But on the other hand, I think having sort of these, whoever those inspirational people are to different generations, I think having that at our fingertips is actually a really amazing thing, sort of the internet and social media has brought. And I think the way that people can share content can make these sort of adventures seem really accessible and really relatable. I remember reading, so Anna McNuff she's cycled around all 50 states of America. She was running the length of New Zealand, and she had this blog. And there was something about the way she shared this adventure that wasn't somebody on TV or just somebody who'd written sort of very kind of, polished books. It felt so real. And I was like, oh, wow, well, if she's doing that sort of thing, maybe that's something I could do. And I always laugh that I later learned that Anna was actually the daughter of 2 Olympians and an ex-team GB rower, and maybe starting from a bit of a different athletic sort of starting point to me. But I do think that kind of way we can share content in that way does actually make adventures seem really a lot more accessible in some ways. And then also the ability to monetize that from people's platforms does open things up to kind of potentially people in different economic positions and stuff. I've managed to make a kind of career out of adventure, I guess. And I didn't know anyone in that. I didn't grow up knowing anyone in that area. I didn't know anyone who'd written books or done anything like that. So I think I actually have a lot to thank the internet for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it all happened for you at the time it was all coming together, wasn't it? The internet was sharing the information. YouTube was all started, and Facebook had started. Whatever was it, 2005? My generation, being somewhat older than yourself, it was all magazines. And the heroes or the influences that we had were the Chris Townsends and the Graham Thompsons of this world, names that probably don't mean anything to you at all. But they're people that were doing this going back to the sort of 60s and 70s. However, because of the nature of the media, which was the physical magazine, you went to Smith's and there was a choice of probably 5-6 magazines, outdoor magazines that you might have purchased, and you chose the one which, just like social media, suited your style of interest. But they didn't inspire you in the same way, I think, that the YouTube influence does. They were interesting and they were informative and they were educational, but they didn't quite sort of motivate you. Although, obviously a lot of people, myself included, started doing what we were doing based on the information we had at the time, and it was just purely magazines. So I wonder if sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had the occasion to look at some of these older magazines and compare them to sort of the current day influence. So it's just a sort of a topic I wanted to explore, really.
Yeah, I think I haven't kind of directly compared at all, though my dad always says that he learned about this thing called hill walking, is what he always says, from magazines. I think he went into WH Smith. He never did anything like that growing up with my grandparents or anything. He went into WH Smith, I think, saw like a trail magazine or a trek magazine or something, bought one of those magazines and was like, oh right, people go up hills, that's something people do. And he took himself off to the Peak District one Saturday with a new raincoat he'd bought and followed one of the routes in those magazines, and that's how he got into the outdoors. And then he spent my childhood dragging me up hills, which I hated at the time, although I'm sure had a good influence looking back on it. But I guess maybe you sort of had to go looking for it a bit more, whereas maybe the good thing about kind of social media and internet is it can sort of just appear in your realm a bit more and is a bit more at your fingertips, which sort of has a negative and positive sort of outcomes sometimes.
We're back to that doom scrolling again, aren't we? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. And you start going down different rabbit holes, certainly. Okay, so let's sort of start to wind this up now. Do describe your most perfect day in the hills. Where would you go? What would you do? What would the weather be like?
Oh, well, I can say this with confidence because I think I had it the weekend before last. I think it was more of a weekend, but both days were really good. So I think the thing about exploring in the UK is sometimes the weather's rubbish and sometimes it's great. And I think the best days are where you've had something in the diary for a while and then it just happens to be brilliant and you can't believe how lucky you feel. So the weekend before last, I'd had it in the diary for a couple of months to go camping in Wasdale with some friends. So western edge of the Lake District. And obviously weather could have been terrible. It was early April. But as we got a bit closer, I was like, oh, it's looking like it might actually be quite good. And so the first day we went and did a loop around Pillar, Kirkfell and Great Gable. We did about 10 miles and I think we were out for 10 hours because we stopped for so many sandwich stops. We stopped for a swim in a waterfall. And it was just one of those days that felt like there was no sort of agenda, no time. It was such a beautiful day. And we were obviously really close to some of the most popular areas of the Lake District. We're a stone's throw from kind of Scarfell Pike, which gets a huge amount of footfall, but we didn't see that many people on the route, first half at least of the route we were on, which I think is something I love about the Lake District. You can go from somewhere so busy and then within half a mile you don't see anyone. And then we camped for the night, had some camping food, and then the next day I went for a run by myself, which was a route I had just plotted on Komoot the day before to go and do over Ilgill Head and Winrig, and it ended up being one of the most amazing routes I've ever run. It just had it all. It was like a bit of a steep start and then a really runnable long descent, and then it was just absolutely beautiful. And I felt like that was a good contrast for me because I'd had this sort of leisurely, no agenda day the day before and then going a bit faster and sort of pushing myself a bit the next day. But I think any day when the sun shines when you're not expecting it to, basically. And we had loads of snacks and an ice cream at the end and the pub. So the dream.
Well, Elise, it's been lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much indeed for your time and squeezing me in. The internet's worked really well, so all good. Now, just one final question. Of all the things I could have asked you about this fabulous new book, the Walk Britain, 90 Inspirational Car-Free Walks in England, Scotland and Wales, what should I have asked you?
Ooh, I guess maybe the question I haven't really been asked much about the book, which I think is sort of interesting. I guess I did touch on it a little bit in the routes I'd taken out, but it's like what routes didn't get included? Was there anything that sort of nearly made the shortlist? And I think the what I really wanted it to be was a bit of a starting point. So I think the 90 routes now are great, personally. They're exactly to my taste, at least. But I have tried to include a lot of good variety in terms of distance, length, area, wherever it is. But I do really believe when it comes to, a car-free adventure especially, something close to home is the best. And I think there's something like amazing about putting a pin in a map, doing an A to B from your front door and getting the bus home. That is the best kind of car-free adventure. So I think the stuff that's not in there is all the stuff that didn't make sense to put in a sort of universally appealing book, because maybe it is an obscure bus in the countryside that doesn't run very often and I couldn't send lots of people to get it. But whatever's in your local area and nearby, I think is sort of the best place to try and do a car-free adventure.
And that's it for today's episode. A huge thanks to Elise Downing for sharing her adventures, insights, and of course her passion for cake-fueled exploring. Her new book, Walk Britain, is available now from Vertebrate Publishing, who specialise in brilliant outdoor guides just like this one. Whether you're into hiking, biking, climbing, or simply discovering the beauty right on your doorstep. All the additional mapping and GPX data can be found on the Vertebrate and Komoot apps, and the book is also packed with useful website links to make your adventure even easier. And speaking of doorsteps, Elise left us with the perfect reminder. The best way to start an adventure is by stepping out of your own front door, whether it's a short stroll or a big challenge. It all begins right there. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend who's ready for their next adventure. I would greatly appreciate it. Coming soon, I'll be releasing a whole range of diverse outdoor-related podcasts over the next few weeks and months. So please check your podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, on a regular basis to hear more. Thanks for listening. And, as always, until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.